Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by defense reporter Mike Brest. Mike, there was a little bit of a bombshell and maybe some rumors, not filling in all of the details, about a possible prisoner swap involving Brittney Griner, the WNBA star, and Paul Whelan, who's been wrongfully detained in Russia for quite some time. We don't really know all the details, but there's been some rumblings that at least the government is considering something substantial. What do we know?
A great place to start is with what we've heard from the White House and the State Department. On Wednesday, we heard from both Secretary Blinken as well as John Kirby, who is the coordinator for the National Security Council, come out and say that the U.S. has offered what they both described as a significant proposal to the Kremlin, specifically to get back Brittney Griner and Paul Whelan. Now, we know Brittney Griner has been detained since February after she was arrested on drug charges. She has since admitted to bringing the drugs into the country, but has said both that it was an accident and that they were medicinally prescribed. She's pled guilty and is facing 10 years in prison. And she testified at her own trial earlier this week, in which she said she was made unaware of her rights at the time of her arrest, and was forced to sign various documents that she wasn't told what they were. And now for Paul Whelan, he was arrested in late 2018, and in 2020 was sentenced to 16 years in prison under allegations that he was a U.S. spy, which obviously he denies. And in both cases, the Biden administration believes they are being wrongfully detained. Now, we've seen some reporting from other outlets and some reporting that we've done that a possible trade candidate would be Russian arms dealer Viktor Bout. Now, Viktor Bout, who is a notorious arms dealer, was arrested in 2012 by the U.S., by the DEA, in a sting operation, and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. His sentence is rapidly coming to a close, and his lawyer said to the Examiner earlier this month that it would make sense for the U.S. to consider giving him back in exchange for Whelan and Griner, because either way, at the end of his sentence, he'll be going back to Russia anyway. And so there's been some reporting that Bout is the person who would be included in these swaps, but the administration obviously has not gone into that level of detail, given the sensitivities of the talks and the fact that they're ongoing.
So, I mean, it's interesting that some of this is coming out after the Biden administration has faced criticism about whether they're doing enough to get Americans out of countries from which they're wrongfully detained, particularly Russia. And in one success story that the administration has had in this area, getting Trevor Reed back to the United States, he's actually been somewhat critical of the administration on this front.
Yeah, and so what Trevor Reed has said is that he's not sure the administration is doing everything in their power to get them home, though he believes that they ultimately will. And so it's important to notice the difference when the Biden administration negotiated for Trevor Reed's release or the release of two hostages from Venezuela earlier this year. There were no rumblings about this beforehand. And so it is a significant divergence from standard U.S. policy to publicly share the ongoing negotiations before there is something substantive or that they're actually on their way back. And so there are a number of reasons that the U.S. Or the administration could have decided to do this. One of them could have been coming from the outside pressure from advocacy groups, from the WNBA, from Brittney Griner's wife, Sherelle, and a number of other advocates who have taken up her case, given her status as both someone who is a professional athlete, as someone who's black, as someone who's gay. She has received a lot of public support, and in turn that has pressured the administration to go to every length that they can to get her back.
So another area where the administration is maybe facing some pressure is House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has been contemplating a visit to Taiwan. They've not exactly said that she shouldn't go, but the White House hasn't been really very reassuring about the prospects of her going, and the military has outright said that they have major concerns about that kind of a trip, given some of the tensions with China going on. What do we know about this?
So the first thing that is important to note is that neither the White House nor the Pentagon have said that they would stop the Speaker from going. And Speaker Pelosi has been pretty adamant in her intentions to go to Taiwan next month. during a trip to the Pacific region. And so we saw President Biden last week mention that he said the military didn't think it was a good idea, sort of putting that blame on the Pentagon. But we've seen whether it was Secretary Austin or, again, John Kirby from the Security Council acknowledge that there are significant security risks, but also significant precautions that can be taken should she decide to make this trip. Though there is significant divide in D.C. about whether she should. And an interesting aspect is that a big portion of the Republican Party on the Hill is actually supporting her, in part because they believe in the strong show of support that her presence would present, in part because she's the highest-ranking official to travel to Taiwan, if she does, since 1997.
Right. So when Newt Gingrich, then House Speaker, visited Taiwan. So there's been a lot of talk about whether China might commit some act of aggression against Taiwan, maybe modeling after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, maybe for its own reasons. And various U.S. leaders have tried to sort of shore up what's considered Washington's support for Taiwan. But our actual policy towards Taiwan, given our relations with mainland China, is kind of ambiguous.
Absolutely. So the U.S. Policy, they acknowledge that China says Taiwan is theirs, while also acknowledging that Taiwan wants their own independence, and they decide to hear both sides, not really pick a side. And they also, the administration and previous administrations have relied on what they call strategic ambiguity, which says they will keep their cards very close to the vest, so that China can't prepare for what a U.S. reaction would look like should they make a move on Taiwan.
So closer to home, the U.S. Army has been struggling with meeting some of its recruitment goals, blaming the pandemic and a number of other factors. They're rolling out a new program to increase the number of people who would potentially be able to meet the standards for recruitment. What can you tell us about that?
So a good place to start is that recruitment across all service branches is down.
Right.
And it is due to a number of factors, according to various branches that we've spoken to. And as you said, part of it is the pandemic, part of it is also the percentage of Americans who actually fit the requirements has gone down over recent years from about 29% to 23%.
Sure.
Not only that, various leaders have said that fewer Americans have, close ties to the military or have direct exposure to the military, which is also part of how they're able to recruit. And so the Army this week announced a new program where they will take recruits who don't meet the requirements, put them through a little bit of a basic training to help them pad their stats so that they can retake sort of the qualification test so that they can do better and ultimately pass.
Now, are there any concerns that this could lead to a lowering of standards?
We've heard some rumblings about that, but for the most part, it seems like a bigger concern is not having a large enough military at this point. So it does seem like this is one way that they will be able to increase their numbers.
Uncle Sam wants you. Thank you, Mike. You can read Mike and the rest of our national security team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.